Mission Control has entered its second equipment item. Unfortunately, there is a problem. The oxygen generator and the water recycling unit both have the same equipment identification number. If two rows use the same ID, how can Mission Control know which item equipment ID 1 refers to? An identification number is useful only when it identifies one item. If the same value belongs to multiple rows, the ID no longer gives us a clear answer. This creates ambiguity and makes updates, deletions, and relationships dangerous. Mission Control needs a rule that prevents duplicate equipment IDs. Not every column makes a good identifier. Two equipment items can have the same name. Several items can have the same weight. Priority levels repeat by design. For this table, the equipment ID is intended to identify one specific equipment record. We need SQL Server to enforce that intention. A primary key is a rule applied to one column, or sometimes a group of columns. Its purpose is to uniquely identify every row in the table. When equipment ID becomes the primary key, SQL Server will prevent two rows from using the same ID. It will also prevent the ID from being missing. The simplest way to create a primary key is to include primary key in the column definition. Here, equipment ID uses the int data type and is also declared as the table's primary key. The remaining columns store descriptive facts about the equipment. Why? Only equipment ID identifies the row. We insert the oxygen generator with equipment ID 1. Because the table is currently empty, that value is unique. SQL Server accepts the row. The primary key does not change the way we insert valid data. It simply checks that the identifying value follows the rule. Now we try to insert the water recycling unit using the same equipment ID. SQL Server checks the existing primary key values. Equipment ID 1 already belongs to the oxygen generator. The new row violates the primary key rule, so SQL Server rejects it. An error is useful when it prevents incorrect data from entering the database. The failed statement does not replace the oxygen generator. It does not add a second equipment ID 1. The table remains unchanged. Primary keys help preserve the integrity of the data by rejecting ambiguous identities. We correct the statement by assigning equipment ID 2 to the water recycling unit. The value is not already present in the table. SQL Server accepts the new row, and both equipment records now have unique identities. The table now contains two rows. Equipment ID 1 identifies the oxygen generator. Equipment ID 2 identifies the water recycling unit. Because the values are unique, Mission Control can refer to each record without ambiguity. This becomes especially important when other tables need to refer to equipment records later in the mission. A primary key enforces two important rules. First, its value must be unique. Second, its value cannot be null. Null represents missing or unknown information. A row cannot have an unknown primary identity because then the database could not reliably distinguish it from other rows. A table can have only one primary key, although that primary key can sometimes contain more than one column. We will explore that more advanced design later. Now it is your turn. Create the flight table with FlightId as its primary key. Insert the first flight using FlightId 1. Then deliberately try to insert another flight using the same ID and observe what happens. Finally, correct the duplicate value. In the next episode, a new cargo record arrives with missing information. We will learn what null means and how not null can require important values.